James always liked to walk around the botanical garden, which was located in the center of the city. He found peace among the dense greenery and bright flowers. On this day, when the sun was shining especially brightly and a light breeze brought the fresh scent of flowering plants, James decided to take a day off and spend it in the garden. He wanted to take a break from the daily hustle and bustle and enjoy the beauty of nature. Passing by fountains and manicured flower beds, he noticed a girl reading a book on one of the benches. Something about her caught his attention. She had smooth, dark skin, and long hair streamed over her shoulders, creating a peculiar contrast with the white dress she wore. She seemed immersed in reading, oblivious to the world around her. James couldn't take his eyes off her. The girl was so beautiful that she seemed almost unreal. He suddenly felt an irresistible urge to go over and talk to her. He slowly came closer, trying not to make too much noise, so as not to scare off this mysterious stranger.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I just couldn't help but notice you sitting here reading. What book are you reading?
Naomi looked up from her book and looked at him. Her gaze was warm, but with a kind of deep sadness hidden behind the sparkle of her brown eyes. She smiled a slight, almost invisible smile.
These are the poems of Lorca. I love his poems. They remind me of my childhood.
James felt his heart beat a little faster. Her voice was soft and melodious, and he suddenly realized that he didn't know what to say. He usually didn't get lost in communication, but now something knocked him out of his rut.
It's nice to meet someone who loves poetry. My name is James, and yours?
My name is Naomi.
She lowered her eyes to the book again, as if wanting to return to her own world. James felt that he needed to continue the conversation. Otherwise, this magical moment would disappear.
It's very beautiful here, isn't it? I often come here when I need to think or just relax.
Naomi looked up at James again, and a more pronounced smile appeared on her face.
Yes, I love this garden too. It's quiet here. It seems that time is standing still.
James sat down on the edge of the bench, leaving a small distance between them so as not to embarrass her. Naomi didn't object, but she didn't make the slightest attempt to move or change her position. He noticed that her legs were hidden under a long dress, which she was carefully arranging around herself.
Do you come here often?
Almost every day. This place gives me a sense of freedom.
James felt himself getting more involved with Naomi by the second. He couldn't help but notice her strange behavior. She sat so still, as if she was afraid to move.
Why do you always sit on the same bench? There are many other places where you can read or just relax.
Naomi thought for a moment. Her gaze became serious.
I'm just used to this place. I'm comfortable here.
James realized that he might have gone too far in his curiosity and decided to change the subject.
I'd like to get to know you better, Naomi. Maybe you'd like to take a walk with me sometime? Or have a coffee?
Naomi looked away, thinking for a moment. Then she looked at him again, this time with a bit of sadness in her eyes.
James, I appreciate your offer, but I don't think you should contact me. I'm not like everyone else.
These words only piqued James' curiosity.
Why do you say that? We are all unique in our own way. I don't see anything strange in just talking and getting to know each other better.
Naomi sighed softly, her eyes dropping back to the book she was no longer reading, but just holding in her hands.
Sometimes it's better to leave a mystery unsolved, James. But I am grateful for your attention.
James realized that Naomi wasn't in the mood to continue the conversation, at least not today. But he wasn't going to give up. Something about this girl attracted him so much that he decided to return to the garden again to try to solve this mystery.
Okay, Naomi. I won't bother you anymore, but I hope we'll meet again. It was a pleasure to meet you.
He slowly got up from the bench and, after a little hesitation, turned around and walked away, looking over his shoulder. Naomi watched him go, and then returned to her reading, but something inexplicable flickered in her eyes for a long time. It had been a few days since their first meeting, but James couldn't stop thinking about Naomi. Her mysterious aura and unusual behavior attracted him more and more. The memory of her soft voice and sad look haunted him. He kept thinking back to the day they met at the botanical garden. James decided he had to go back there and see her again, even if it looked weird. The next day he went to the garden earlier than usual, hoping to catch Naomi. Walking along the alleys and looking behind every bush, he noticed her on the same bench. She was reading again, and there was the same silence and tranquility around her as when they first met. James felt his heart beat faster with anticipation. He came closer, this time trying not to hide his steps.
Good afternoon, Naomi. I'm glad to see you here again.
Naomi looked up from her book and smiled when she saw James. Surprise flashed in her eyes, but not rejection.
Hello, James. You are back in this garden. You really like this place.
James noticed that she remembered his name, and it gave him confidence. He sat down on the edge of the bench again, a little closer than last time, but still leaving a space between them.
Yes, I couldn't help but come back. I've been thinking a lot about you since we met, Naomi. They intrigued me.
Naomi looked at him with interest, but there was still a shadow of sadness in her eyes.
James, you seem to be a persistent person, and that's a good thing. But I'm still not sure if you want to know more about me.
James smiled, leaning a little closer.
Why are you so sure? Maybe I'm not as skittish as you think. I really want to get to know you better.
Naomi looked down, thinking for a moment. She wanted to believe that James was sincere, that he was really interested in her, and not just a mystery that he wanted to solve. But her doubts wouldn't let go.
James, I'm not like everyone else. I have my own reasons for staying here and avoiding unnecessary contacts. I don't want you to be disappointed.
James stared at her intently, trying to read her mind. He could see that Naomi was holding back, but something in her eyes told him that she wanted to confide in him too, was also looking for someone who would understand. I understand that each of us has our own secrets, but I'm not here to be disappointed. I'm here because I want to get to know you better. Would you give me a chance? Naomi thought for a moment. Her heart wavered between fear and desire. She had never met anyone who was as persistent and sincere as James. There was too much loneliness and misunderstanding in her world.
All right, James. I'll give you a chance. But I warn you, this will not be an ordinary acquaintance.
James felt his heart leap with joy. He hadn't expected Naomi to agree to further communication so soon, but he was determined not to disappoint her.
How about a coffee? There is a great cafe nearby. It's quiet and cozy there. No one will disturb us.
Naomi shook her head, smiling slightly.
Unfortunately, I cannot leave this garden. There are things that keep me here.
James frowned, trying to figure out what she meant.
But why? What's holding you back? Is this related to what you said last time, that you are not like everyone else?
Naomi nodded.
Yes, James. And if you really want to get to know me better, you'll have to accept it. I can't tell you everything right now, but maybe in time.
James decided not to push her. He felt that he was slowly but surely making his way through its walls. He knew he couldn't rush things.
Okay, I'm ready to wait. We can just sit here and talk. Tell me about what you like, about your childhood, or about something that makes you happy.
Naomi relaxed. Her face softened.
I like nature. I love the sounds of the forest and the whisper of the wind. My grandmother used to tell me stories about how she used to walk in the woods in her youth. These stories have always been full of wonders and mysteries.
James smiled, seeing the lightness on her face when she talked about her grandmother.
Does your grandmother still tell you these stories?
Naomi shook her head, the smile on her face fading slightly.
No, she left a long time ago. But I remember every story she told. They helped me feel less lonely.
James realized that Naomi was very attached to the memories of her family and decided to keep the conversation going in this direction.
My grandmother also told me a lot of stories when I was little, especially about how she met my grandfather. They met in an old bookstore, and it was love at first sight. It sounds like a cliché, but it's true. I always thought that such stories only happened in books until I heard her story.
Naomi nodded, her eyes filled with a soft light.
Sometimes reality can be more beautiful than any story, especially when it is filled with love and warmth.
They continued to talk for a long time, discussing everything from favorite books to childhood memories. Naomi felt that James was not just a curious stranger, but a man who really wanted to understand her. She noticed that every minute her fears and doubts subsided, giving way to calmness and even joy. Time flew by imperceptibly, and the sun began to set. James felt that this day had become special for him. He realized that he was attracted to Naomi not just by the mystery of her essence, but also by her inner beauty, her kindness and sincerity.
Naomi, I am very glad that I met you again today. I hope I can get to know you even better in the future.
Naomi smiled. For the first time since the beginning of their acquaintance, her smile was full, open and warm.
I'm glad too, James. Maybe tomorrow we can meet here again.
James couldn't believe his luck.
Of course, I'd love to.
With that, they said goodbye, and James went home with the feeling that his life had begun to change for the better. He knew that there were still many unknowns ahead, but he was ready to accept whatever fate brought him. The next day, James couldn't wait to meet Naomi. He woke up with the first rays of the sun, and all his thoughts were focused on their conversation yesterday. He felt that something had changed between them, that she had finally begun to trust him. Despite the fact that Naomi remained mysterious, he felt that she was beginning to open up to him. With hope in his heart, he headed to the botanical garden. Naomi was already waiting for him on the same bench. As before, she was sitting with a book in her hands, but now her gaze was more calm and confident. When James approached her, she looked up and smiled in greeting. They decided to take a walk in the garden and talk about their hobbies and dreams. Despite the fact that Naomi never got up from the bench, James noticed that she was always ready for their meetings and conversations. She was especially silent today. James sensed that she was thinking about something, as if trying to find the right words for an important conversation. He was nervous too, sensing that something significant was going to happen today. As soon as they started talking, James noticed a special seriousness in Naomi's voice. After a short walk, they returned to the bench. James felt that this was the right moment to offer Naomi a new place to meet. He knew a great secluded cafe nearby and hoped that she would agree to meet there. However, as soon as he started to speak, Naomi stopped him with a hand gesture. There was uncertainty in her eyes, but also determination. Naomi sighed and looked at James. Her face became serious, and there was something in her eyes that was hard to read. She knew that now was the moment when she had to be honest with him. This conversation couldn't be delayed any longer because their bond was getting stronger, and James deserved to know the truth. Naomi began to speak, her voice low but firm. She explained that she had been living in this garden for a long time, that her presence here was not accidental. She told him that her childhood was filled with mysteries and oddities that she could not understand for a long time on her own. Since childhood, she knew that she was different from other people. At first, it manifested itself in strange visions and sensations that she could not explain. And then, as she grew up, she realized her true nature. Naomi told James that she was half a snake. Her body combines the features of a human and a snake. She explained that her mother was a human and her father was a magical being, a snake spirit from ancient myths. This explained many of the features of her appearance and behavior. Naomi couldn't walk like normal people because she had a snake's tail instead of legs. That's why she always sat on a bench, hiding her lower body with long dresses. James listened to her in complete shock. Naomi's words seemed incredible to him. How can human and snake nature be combined? He felt a wave of disbelief rising inside him, mixed with misunderstanding. He didn't know what to think or how to react. But he also knew that Naomi was telling the truth. There was no doubt in her voice or attempt to deceive him. Naomi continued her story, explaining that her life was filled with fears and secrecy. She was afraid that people would not be able to accept her for who she was, that her nature would disgust or fear them. She tried many times to live among people, but each time her secret became an obstacle to a normal life. Her heart was wounded from constant loneliness and rejection. That's why she decided to settle in this garden, away from human eyes and prejudices. Naomi admitted that their meetings with James became something special for her. She felt that he was different from others, that he could understand her and accept her. But at the same time, she didn't want to put him through a test that might be too difficult for him. However, every day, seeing his persistence and sincerity, she realized that she had to be honest with him. When Naomi finished her story, she looked at James intently, trying to read his mind. He sat in silence, his face focused, but there was no horror or disgust on it. Naomi didn't know what to say next. Her heart was beating faster than usual, and she waited with bated breath for his reaction. James remained motionless. Conflicting emotions raged inside him. On the one hand, he was shocked. How is this even possible? But on the other hand, he felt that his feelings for Naomi had not changed. She was the same girl he had started falling in love with. Her kindness, wisdom, and calmness still attracted him. James understood that his fear of the unknown should not be stronger than his feelings. It took several long minutes for James to realize that he had to say something. He gathered his thoughts and tried to imagine himself in her place. Naomi had opened up to him, trusted him with her secret, and he couldn't afford to turn his back on her. He knew that he was faced with a choice: either accept her for who she was, with all her oddities and secrets, or leaving her alone, which had accompanied her for so long. James took a deep breath. He realized that his love for Naomi was stronger than any fear of the unknown. He realized that it doesn't matter what kind of nature she has, human or snake. The main thing is her soul, her heart, which he has already fallen in love with. It was a test not only for her, but also for himself, a test of fortitude and faith in his love. With these thoughts, James finally raised his head and looked Naomi straight in the eye. At that moment, he realized that she was not just a mystery that needed to be solved. She was a person with her own story and pain, but also with great potential for love and understanding. He saw Naomi anxiously waiting for his reaction, and this only strengthened his decision. James took a step forward and sat down next to her on the bench, feeling her snake tail move slightly under Naomi's dress. This movement, barely perceptible, did not frighten him, but on the contrary, strengthened his intention. He knew that love is not always simple, and that sometimes you have to go through difficulties to truly understand and appreciate each other. Naomi was amazed. She hadn't expected James to accept her truth so calmly. She was afraid that she would lose him, that he would leave, afraid of her essence. But James stayed. He didn't just stay, he showed understanding and support that she hadn't seen in other people. It was amazing and incredibly valuable to her. James felt that he had made the right choice. He knew that there were still many difficulties and misunderstandings ahead of them from others, but he also knew that he was ready to walk this path with Naomi. He saw her eyes fill with gratitude and relief, and it only strengthened him in his decision. For Naomi, it was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She didn't feel lonely anymore. She found someone who was willing to accept her for who she is. James became for her not just a friend, but a man she could trust, a man with whom she could share her life. This is how their first date ended, not like ordinary people, but like those who decided to take a step towards the unknown, trusting their hearts and believing that true love is able to overcome any obstacles. After James found out the truth about Naomi, he was determined to support her and develop their relationship despite the unusual circumstances. However, his confidence that they could overcome any difficulties together was soon put to the test. James decided not to hide his relationship with Naomi from friends and family. He was convinced that sincerity and honesty were the best way to move forward. However, as soon as he shared the news that he was dating a half-snake girl, the reaction of his loved ones was far from positive. They took his words as a joke or a strange misconception. At first, friends and relatives tried to convince James that he was just going through some kind of crisis or experimenting with an unusual choice of partner. They said he needed to meet a normal girl and forget about his bizarre fantasy. Some of his friends even suggested that he might have been influenced by some sect or occult movement. They did not believe that half-snakes could actually exist and believed that James was either joking or crazy. James' parents, who had always supported him, were now worried and did not understand what was happening to their son. James's mother cried, urging him to end the dangerous relationship. His father, on the contrary, was strict and stern, convinced that James was succumbing to some strange illusions and behaving irresponsibly. They tried to convince him to stop communicating with Naomi, believing that he was risking his future and reputation. James's friends didn't stay away either. They persistently suggested that he go out with them, meet other girls, forget about the fabulous nonsense. Some even tried to find a psychologist so that James could sort out his feelings and return to reality. They didn't realize that reality had already changed for James and that his feelings for Naomi were deeper than they could have imagined. With each passing day, the pressure from loved ones became stronger. James understood that his love for Naomi was being severely tested. The internal conflict was growing. On the one hand, he wanted his family and friends to accept his choice. But on the other hand, he was not going to betray Naomi for their approval. Meanwhile, Naomi herself was also feeling insecure and afraid. Despite James's determination to be with her, she couldn't shake her doubts. She saw that their relationship caused only a negative reaction from his family and felt guilty for it. Her own fears and doubts rose to the surface again. Naomi doubted whether she could even be a part of the ordinary world and whether she deserved the love of a man like James. Naomi began to distance herself, fearing that her presence was ruining James' life. She didn't want to be the cause of his disagreements with his family and friends. She knew she couldn't change her nature, and she thought that perhaps the best way out was to break up with him, so as not to complicate his life. James noticed that Naomi was starting to avoid meetings. She was no longer waiting for him on her bench, and their phone conversations became rare and short. James felt like he was losing her, and it hurt him. He realized that he had to do something. Otherwise, everything they had built would collapse under the pressure of others and internal fears. One evening, after another tense conversation with his parents, James made a decision. He realized that he had to fight not only the prejudices of others, but also his own doubts. He understood that Naomi was also struggling with her fears and worries. To strengthen their relationship, he needs to prove to everyone and to himself that his love for Naomi is not a temporary whim or delusion. The next day, James went to the botanical garden where they first met. He felt that this was where he had to make the final decision. Walking along the alleys, he recalled every moment he spent with Naomi, her smile, her soft voice, her calmness, and the strength with which she shared her unusual story. He understood that his love for Naomi was not just a romantic infatuation, but something deeper and more meaningful. James decided that he would not let fears and prejudices destroy their bond. He knew he had to be strong and determined to protect what he held dear. He understood that Naomi needed his support, and that their future depended on his willingness to accept her for who she was and fight for their love. Gathering all his will and determination, James went in search of Naomi. He knew he had to talk to her openly and convince her that they could be together despite all the difficulties. When he finally found her in the garden, she was sitting on a bench, lost in thought. James walked over to her and sat down next to her, trying to contain his emotions. He started talking to Naomi about his feelings, how she had changed his life, and how he didn't want to lose her because of other people's fears and prejudices. He told her that he was ready to fight for their love, and that he would not allow anyone, not even his family and friends, to destroy what they had. Naomi listened to him in silence, her heart beating faster with every word he said. She saw the determination in his eyes and felt his sincerity. Despite all her doubts, she couldn't ignore the fact that James really loved her and was willing to do anything for their future together. After a long conversation, James felt that he had done everything he could. He knew that everything now depended on Naomi, on her decision and willingness to believe in their love. He left her alone so she could think and make her own decision. Naomi sat in silence for a long time, thinking about everything James had said. She understood that their relationship would not be easy, that they would have to face many obstacles and difficulties. But she also realized that James was someone who was willing to fight for her, no matter what. She felt his love and care, and it gave her strength and confidence. The next day, Naomi made her decision. She realized that she couldn't leave James, that their love was worth fighting for. They met again in the garden, and Naomi told him that she was ready to walk this path together, despite all the fears and obstacles. She knew that there were many challenges ahead of them, but she believed that together they could overcome everything. From that moment on, James and Naomi began a new chapter in their lives. They decided not to hide their relationship and fight for their right to be together, despite the opinions and prejudices of others. James is determined to show everyone that true love knows no barriers, and that together they can overcome any difficulties. And although the road ahead was full of difficulties and trials, their love became stronger. They realized that they would do anything to be together, and that their feelings for each other are stronger than any fears and doubts. James and Naomi decided to prove to everyone and to themselves that true love is able to overcome any obstacles, and that they are ready to fight for their happiness. After a frank conversation and the decision to fight for their relationship, James and Naomi felt that their love had strengthened. However, they had to go through many trials. The world they lived in was not ready to accept a relationship between a human and a creature that was so different from the norm. Naomi and James understood that they had to fight not only for the right to be together, but also for the right to be understood and accepted. The first weeks after their decision were especially difficult. James noticed that many of his friends began to avoid him. At first it was awkward pauses in conversations and avoiding the topic of his relationship with Naomi. Then there were direct and frank conversations that he was wrong. Some even stopped communicating with him altogether, believing that he had chosen too strange and dangerous a path. It was painful, because James had always considered them close, but he wasn't going to change his mind. It became difficult for James at work, too. Some colleagues who found out about his unusual relationship began to look at him with disbelief and even contempt. There were rumors and whispers behind his back, discussions that he heard out of the corner of his ear in the corridors. Those around him did not understand why he decided to connect his life with someone who was not human in the full sense of the word. Despite all this, James continued to do his job without showing how deeply these reactions hurt him. Naomi was also facing her own difficulties at this time. She understood that now that she and James had decided to be together openly, her existence had become known to many. She began to feel people's eyes on her when she left the garden, although she tried to avoid direct contact. Her fears were growing, but she held on for James' sake. She didn't want her fears and worries to affect their relationship. Naomi knew she needed to be strong to support James in his decision. To show people that their relationship is not a whim or a delusion, James and Naomi decided to gradually introduce her to his world. At first, it was small steps, walking in public places, meeting with individual friends who were more open to understanding and accepted her for who she was. Gradually, they began to go beyond the garden, choosing secluded corners of the city where no one knew them. Naomi, despite her fears, tried to adapt and get used to the new world. Over time, they began to invite other people to meetings, those who showed interest and were ready to understand. At these meetings, Naomi tried to be as open as possible, talk about her life and nature, and answer questions, even if they were difficult or unpleasant. James was always there, supporting her, holding her hand, showing that she was not alone. These meetings helped them both. They learned to accept themselves and each other in this new light, and also found support among people who are ready to understand. However, not everything went smoothly. There were moments when prejudice and distrust prevailed. Some meetings ended unsuccessfully when people couldn't cope with the shock of her nature. There were also those who openly expressed their rejection, sometimes even aggressively. Naomi often heard hurtful words and felt judgmental glances at herself. Each such case was for her a painful reminder of her otherness. But every time she was ready to give up, James reminded her that she was more than just a half snake. She was a person with soul and feelings, and she deserved to be happy. Despite all the difficulties, they did not give up. Gradually, James realized that in order for their relationship to truly become full-fledged, he needed to take the next important step to introduce Naomi to his nana. It was not an easy decision. He knew how they might react. He knew that he might face even more confrontation and misunderstanding. But he also understood that without this step, they would not be able to move on. Naomi was also worried about this meeting. She knew how important his parents' opinion was to James, and she didn't want to cause an even bigger rift between them. But she also understood that this meeting was inevitable. They agreed that they would do it in a calm atmosphere, without pressure and unnecessary expectations. On the day of the meeting, James was tense. He brought Naomi to his parents' house, trying not to show her his concern. Their parents greeted them on the threshold with caution. James's mother was visibly upset, and his father looked stern and reserved. They went into the living room, where there was an awkward silence. Naomi felt the tension building in the room. She realized that for them, she was not just a girl, but something more, something incomprehensible and even frightening. Naomi started talking about herself. She talked about her life, how long she lived alone, and how she met James. She tried to be frank and honest, not hiding her nature, but also not emphasizing her otherness. Her voice was calm, but there was sincerity and kindness in it. James watched his parents' reactions carefully. He could see that his mother was still wary, but with every word Naomi said, her face softened. His father was still stern, but there was a spark of interest in his eyes. James's mother asked a few questions, timidly at first, then more confidently. She asked about how Naomi copes with everyday difficulties, how she lives and what interests her. Naomi was happy to respond, talking about her hobbies and dreams. Gradually, the ice began to melt. James noticed how his mother became more open. Her voice stopped trembling with excitement. My father also started asking questions, and although they were more restrained and formal, there was interest in them. With each response from Naomi, the tension in the room eased. James's parents began to see her not only as a half-snake, but also as a person kind, intelligent, caring. She wasn't just a creature from myths or fantasies. She was real, with her own feelings, fears, and dreams. This realization was a turning point for them. As the conversation was coming to an end, James's mother got up and walked over to Naomi. She looked into her eyes and said that she understood how difficult it must be for her in this world, and that she was grateful that Naomi honestly and openly shared her story. It was an important recognition, and it meant that they began to accept her. My father didn't say anything, but nodded in agreement, which was a big step for him. After this meeting, the relationship between Naomi and James's family began to change. It wasn't easy, and it took time to completely break down the barriers of distrust and fear. But every day they got closer. James's mother began inviting Naomi to family dinners and holidays, trying to get to know her better. Her father also became more interested, asking questions about her life and her past. They began to see Naomi not as a threat or danger, but as a person who sincerely loves their son and is ready to go through any trials for the sake of their relationship. Over time, their relationship became even stronger. They have learned to overcome prejudices and fears together, supporting each other. James and Naomi have become not just a couple, but a team ready to face any difficulties. Their love only became stronger because they went through the fire of trials and came out of it even stronger and more confident in their choice. Now James knew that he had made the right choice when he decided to fight for his love. He saw that true love knows no barriers and that together they can overcome any difficulties. Naomi also realized that her nature is not an obstacle to happiness and that she deserves to be loved and accepted for who she is. Their story has become an example of how love and understanding can overcome any obstacles if people are really ready to fight for their happiness and not be afraid to go against prejudices and fears. Together they built their own world in which they were happy, despite all the difficulties, and continued to love each other, no matter what. After everything they had to go through, James and Naomi realized that their feelings for each other are not just strong, they are indestructible. All the trials and difficulties they have overcome together have only strengthened their bond. They became not only partners for each other, but also support in the most difficult moments. Now their love has been tested by time and has turned into a deep and mutual understanding. James realized that Naomi had become an integral part of his life, and he no longer wanted to waste a minute away from her. Naomi also felt that she had found in James not only a lover, but also a true friend, a man who was ready to accept her for who she was, with all her peculiarities. James thought about his decision for a long time, but the more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Naomi. He understood that this might be unexpected for others, but he could not imagine his life without her. He began to look for the perfect moment to propose to her, knowing that this step would be an important stage in their lives. James wanted it to be not just a proposal, but something special, symbolizing everything they had gone through together. One sunny morning, when the two of them were walking through their favorite botanical garden, James stopped by a large old oak tree where they often met. He took Naomi's hand and, looking into her eyes, expressed his feelings so sincerely and tremulously that Naomi could not hold back tears. He explained to her that he wanted to spend his whole life with her, that he could not imagine his life without her and was ready to do anything to make her happy. Naomi was touched to the core. She knew that this moment would come, but she was still amazed when he asked her to become his wife. Naomi, holding back tears of happiness, agreed. This moment was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives for both of them. Excitement and joy filled their hearts, and they knew that an even more exciting journey awaited them now. However, along with the joy came new fears. How will their families and friends react? Will they be able to make their decision? Naomi and James knew that there were still many difficulties ahead, but they were determined to overcome them together. When they announced their decision to get married, the reaction was mixed. Many of their friends and relatives still had mixed feelings about their relationship. Some still could not fully understand or accept Naomi's nature, and their decision to get married seemed to many too bold a step. James' parents, despite the fact that they gradually began to accept Naomi, were worried about their son's future. They were afraid that he would face even more condemnation from society if he married a woman who was so different from others. However, despite all the doubts and fears of others, James and Naomi were steadfast. They knew that their love was real and that they were ready to take this step for the sake of their happiness. They began to prepare for the wedding, deciding that it would be a small ceremony for the closest ones. They wanted this day to be filled with love and warmth, so that everyone who supported them could share this important moment with them. Preparations for the wedding were in full swing. James and Naomi chose a quiet and cozy place in the woods near the garden where they met. This place was special to them, and they wanted their new life as husband and wife to begin there. They decided that the ceremony would take place outdoors, among trees and flowers, which symbolized their connection with nature and with each other. The wedding day has arrived. The sky was clear and the air was fresh and cool. James was excited, but happy. He felt that a new chapter in his life was beginning today, and he was ready to meet it with an open heart. Naomi was dressed in a simple but elegant dress that emphasized her beauty and uniqueness. She looked great, and there was joy and confidence in her eyes. James couldn't take his eyes off her, realizing how lucky he was to have such an amazing woman in his life. The ceremony began, and an atmosphere of love and support reigned around. They were surrounded by their closest friends and family, those who were ready to accept them for who they are, despite all the differences. James felt incredible warmth and support from those present, and it gave him strength. When it was time to exchange vows, James and Naomi stood face to face, holding hands. James began to speak, his voice trembling slightly with excitement, but there was sincerity and love in his words. He promised to love Naomi, despite all the difficulties that might arise in their path. He promised to be by her side always, to protect her and support her in everything. Naomi listened to him, her heart overflowing with love. When her time came to speak, she felt she had to show everyone that her nature was not a curse, but a blessing. She raised her arms and slowly slid her dress, exposing her snake tail. Many of the guests gasped in surprise. Some took a step back, not knowing how to react. But Naomi wasn't scared. She raised her head and confidently looked into the eyes of James, who did not take his eyes off her. Full of love and acceptance, Naomi began to talk about her life, about how long she had been afraid to be herself, how she hid her nature for fear of condemnation and rejection. But meeting James changed everything. She realized that her nature doesn't make her bad or weird. On the contrary, it makes it unique. She told how James helped her understand that she deserves love and happiness, that she has the right to be who she is, and that her nature may not be a curse, but a gift that she can bring into their life together. The guests listened to her attentively. Naomi felt the atmosphere around her begin to change. Instead of fear and misunderstanding, interest and even admiration appeared in people's eyes. Naomi has shown that she is a strong and confident woman, ready to fight for her happiness and love. She promised James to be by his side always, to love him and support him, despite all the difficulties that might arise. When they finished their vows, the silence was broken by applause. People stood and applauded them, expressing their admiration and support. James and Naomi hugged, feeling that they had made the right choice. Their love was stronger than all prejudices and fears. This moment was the beginning of a new life for both of them, a life where they were together, despite all the difficulties and differences. After the ceremony, a festive lunch began. The guests surrounded James and Naomi, congratulating them and expressing their joy. Many who previously doubted or did not understand their relationship have now seen how much they truly love each other. James' parents came up to them and hugged them, accepting Naomi as their daughter. It was an important moment that showed that true love can overcome any obstacles. The wedding lasted until late in the evening. James and Naomi danced in the open air, surrounded by friends and family. They knew that there were many challenges ahead, but they were confident that they could overcome everything as long as they were together. This day has become a symbol of their love, their strength and their determination to be happy, despite all the difficulties. In the evening, when the sun began to set, they went deep into the forest together to spend some time alone. They looked at the stars and talked about the future that awaits them. They knew that this day was just the beginning of their journey together, but they were ready for this path, full of love and confidence in each other. So their new life together began. James and Naomi were happy to have found each other in this vast world. They knew that their love was a real miracle that was worth cherishing and protecting. And despite all the trials, they were ready to go through life hand in hand, knowing that together they could overcome everything.